Welcome. Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Grace Simpkins, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by Woods Hole Sea Grant, which is where I work, and it's located at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution here on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. To find out about our last webinar, you can always go to the Woods Hole Sea Grant education page or simply follow us on Facebook. Believe it or not, this is our 34th webinar in a series designed to help you get to know NOAA and some of our incredible experts during these months of school closures. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA, and those of you that are our regulars know that that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Now today, it's my pleasure to be introducing you to Mike Ford from NOAA Fisheries. And while we'll be talking about NOAA's role in ocean exploration, we want to recognize that we are coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. We acknowledge that Mike is coming to us from the land of the Piscataway Conoy tribe, the Piscataway Indian Nation, and the Patamac Indian tribe of Virginia. We are hosting this webinar from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gay-Hedequina. A few guidelines, just as usual, you are all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure that everyone can hear Mike. However, the box where you were telling me where you're from, that's where you can write questions. And we encourage you to ask them as we go along. I'll be keeping track of them for Mike, and he will stop every now and then to answer a few. We might not get to all of your questions, but we'll answer as many as we can. And he's got some exciting things to show you. So many really, really amazing images of different jellyfish from the deep ocean. So this is our last sort of regular webinar. We have our All-Stars webinar on Friday, so I'm so excited to be handing it over to you, Mike. And please take it away.
Great. Thanks a lot, Grace. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to all of you about jellyfish, which is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm Mike Ford. I am a NOAA oceanographer, and I've had the pleasure of being able to study jellyfish for the entirety of my career. I grew up in New England, in Rhode Island, and I was close to the Narragansett Bay, so I would, I'd go sailing. I would go to the beach a lot. But when I was in college, I was introduced to jellyfish, and I walked into a laboratory of one of my professors, and there was video playing of jellyfish swimming. And so I was watching these jellyfish swim in these video recordings, and I was just amazed of how they swam, and I started working on it. And so I became a research assistant and just got excited about studying jellyfish, and did that throughout graduate school and continue to study jellyfish to today. So I'm really excited to be here to talk to you today about jellyfish. And jellyfish is a really big word that we use. Jellyfish are, essentially categories of lots of different animals inside. But the one common thing that jellyfish have is that their bodies are kind of what we call gelatinous. So you can see, and like this is Jello. If you think about Jello, that's very not too far from the consistency of the bodies of these animals. Now, of course, the bodies of the animals are really sophisticated, have structures inside to make them work. But you can think about Jello and gelatinous animals as being the general thing that we call jellyfish. So what I wanted to do today is to take a swim with Deep Discoverer and essentially go on a journey with you and take you along on one of our dives that we use to study jellyfish. This is Deep Discoverer. It's our favorite tool for studying jellyfish. This picture is meant to show you some cool things, but it shows you the size of Deep Discoverer. Deep Discoverer is kind of like bigger than a minivan. And it's a big robot, and you can see there's cameras, and there's claws for grabbing things, and you'll see these really neat containers for sampling certain types of jellyfish. Deep Discoverer, the picture that you see here on the crane, is what we call a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, remotely operated vehicle. An ROV doesn't have any people inside. It's a robot, and it's always connected to the ship with a wire. But it has thrusters, and it gets to move around. So we will be taking a journey today with Deep Discoverer, the ROV. And the ROV is connected to this ship, the NOAA ship, Oceanographic Explorer. And so the ship can travel all over the world, and then our ROV can dive into the water and take a look at things. One neat aspect I wanted to tell you before I'll pause for questions is that basically the ROV allows us to look at jellyfish and even sample them in a different way. Before we had ROVs, we would go to the ocean with the ships, and we would use plankton nets like these to collect jellies. And you can see nets like this, a bigger version, would be towed behind the ship, and the jellyfish can be collected inside. The problem with the nets is that they're really rough, and they're kind of like a window screen. And that's not really good for the jellyfish that we want to sample. It's too rough. It might break their bodies, and the samples we get won't be so good. And this wasn't really as great as the ROV that we have now. But today, the ROV that we have has what we call a suction sampler. It's like a vacuum hose for the ROV. And here is the hose, and there's a tiny jellyfish that just got sampled in the hose. So as we come across something interesting, the ROV pilot will activate the suction, and the animals will go in a really gentle way into the ROV. And inside the ROV, we have these special sample jars. And you can see a picture of them here. In one of them, there's one particular animal from the bottom, and then this other one that says number 4, this could be our jellyfish inside. And those canisters keep everything safe and closed up. And then when it gets to the surface, people can take it, we can take it out of the canister, and it can be put in sample jars. And then the sample jars can go into the laboratory on the ship, and we can look at them with the microscope. And then the sample jars travel from the ship all the way back to our laboratories. We can look at the animals through the microscope, and we can check them out for DNA and do research on them and learn about these particular animals. So the ROV is a great way of looking at jellyfish. It doesn't really disturb the jellyfish. We can collect them with this gentle suction sampler, and then we can get a great sample to learn a lot more about the jellyfish in the lab where everything's controlled. So those are some of the great tools that we get to use, and that's what we'll be exploring with today. One more quick stop before we get going. I wanted to show you where a lot of these dives take place. Almost all of the video that I show you today will be from the Pacific Ocean. This is the United States and North America. So if you take a look at the Pacific Ocean, which is over here off the coast of California, there's Hawaii. A lot of these dives happen around here. When you go on vacation with your parents, you might go to you might take a trip to the Grand Canyon or go to some mountain somewhere. Oceanographers do a very similar thing. We just look for features sometimes on the bottom. And what we're looking at here are basically seamounts. They're mountains at the bottom of the ocean. And that's where a lot of these dives took place. So before we dive in, why don't we pause and see if there's any questions about what I've been talking about so far?
Well, I'm really glad that you stopped, Mike, because I have to tell you, as I told you ahead of time, we have a very savvy crew, and they do have some great questions for you. I also just wanted to do a shout out to Duncan, because he mentioned that we learned about the ROV and the Oceanographic Explorer in a past webinar. So anyone who wanted to know more about the ROV or see a tour of the Oceanographic Explorer, one of our previous webinars, you can see the one with Colin Little. So good job remembering that, Duncan. So Christopher and Paul both had a very similar question. Do you put the jellyfish back? Do you put them back in the same place or release them?
On some studies we do. On these particular studies, where we're going into the very deep ocean and we're going to places where nobody's been before, we're taking the jellyfish and we're keeping them in the laboratory and we're going to study them. So we're using those samples to take measurements, take lots of photographs, look at them in the microscope, and do samples on them to look at DNA to learn about how they grew, what role they have in the ocean, and to describe them for everybody else. I should say that most of the jellyfish that we see have never been seen by people before. So these are the first ones ever. So we typically hang on to them.
Great. Now, an interesting question that came from Texas. We know that jellyfish are not made of jello. So Texas is wondering what jellyfish are made out of. And Bridget, in the same sort of line of questioning, was wondering if they're mostly water.
Sure. Jellyfish do have a lot of water in them. Their structure, there is not jello. You're absolutely right. The jello, the gelatinous material inside a jellyfish, has a fancy word. It's called mesobulia. And there's structure inside. There are cells and there are strands inside it to make it rigid, a little bit more rigid than very loose jello. But jellyfish are very neat. They have this way of growing with this gelatinous body really quickly. And with not much musculature, they can do a lot of things. So imagine sort of a gelatinous body, and around the outside is a lot of these modified cells that act like muscles. So jellies are kind of like very fancy gelatinous material to allow them to do pretty incredible things.
Okay, thank you. And just to answer, Christopher asked an interesting question, do they have bones? And so I'll just reiterate, there are no bones inside the bodies of jellyfish. Now, Ellie is one of our regulars. She asked one of my favorite questions. What is your favorite part of your job, Mike?
Sure. I have a lot of cool parts of my job, and I enjoy lots of parts of it. For a long time, one of the things I actually enjoyed a lot is illustrating, drawing the things that I saw. Actually, one of the first things I did as a researcher was a scientific illustration, a line drawing of jellyfish and how the water moved on it. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I have to say, though, the thing I probably enjoy the most now is watching these dives or participating in ROV dives. I just like the idea of being there where nobody has ever seen anything before, with a team of people that are connected. There may be 20 of us all around the world watching through the ROV live and seeing what's going on. I think that's really exciting, and the things that we see just blow our minds. So that's probably my favorite thing right now.
Excellent. And I have to say, I am jealous having seen the images that you collect. I think that what you do is pretty amazing. I think that would be a fun thing to get to do. And just kids out there, poor Mike told me he has to watch ROV footage for the rest of the day with a student. And I said, that sounds like a great day to me. I'm going to hold the rest of the questions, Mike, just to give you a heads up, because I think you're going to get to all of these. We had Tess asking how many different kinds of jellyfish there are. Brody was saying, are they all poisonous? Brendan was asking, how do they eat and where's their mouth? So I don't want you to answer those questions now because I know you're going to get to them, but I wanted you to know that they all want to know. So please continue on.
Great. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, here we go. So we are going to start our journey. So the way I wanted to talk to you today about jellyfish, and the coolest way I thought, was to come along for a dive. So let's take a look at some video from the ROV. And so, like every dive, the ROV plunges into the water, and we go from working on the ship above or working in our command center to watching the undersea. But one thing as we jump in, I think we should remember is that the ocean is huge. You know, the average depth of the ocean is like 2.5 miles deep. That's kind of very, very deep. And as you know, the ocean covers most of the Earth. So the ocean represents the largest area that life can live. We call it a biome, but it's the largest place on the planet where life can live. So, and there are tons of jellies in there, which means there are a lot of jellies in the Earth. Okay, let's take a look, and we're going to cruise along with this video from Deep Discoverer and look at our first jelly of the day. Okay, I see a purple jelly. It's kind of C-shaped the way we're looking at it. And I can't stop looking at those shimmering structures all through here, these lines of shimmering. It's really dark. It's like black, kind of purple. And it looks like now, as it's turning a little bit, that those are sort of like big lobes, like big wings that are wide open. It's moving very slowly. And the only light, by the way, is coming from the ROV. It's totally dark down here. So let's take a closer look at this particular jelly. Okay, this jelly that we just found with the ROV deep in the ocean in the Pacific is called a Atenophore. Atenophore is kind of a big word, so let's break it down. Atenophore is the Atenophore, the word, comes from ten, which is a Greek word that means comb, and phore is a Greek word forest, mean bearing. So when you think of this word Tenophore, that's really funny that starts with a C, but Tenophore, it's comb bearing. These are jellies that have combs. And when I say combs, I mean, they have combs like a comb. They have cilia or hairs on their body. And those hairs move back and forth rhythmically over and over again. That's what we saw that was shimmering, the combs going back and forth. And that's how it moves in the ocean. So we can take a closer look at another picture here on the bottom left. This is a picture with a very powerful microscope at what those hairs look like. And when you look at this picture, the reflecting parts that are reflecting light from the ROV back to the camera, those are all those ten rows. That's characteristic of a Tenophore. So when we see animals that have those, we know it's a Tenophore. This one has a Latin name. Its scientific name is Lampoctes. And it's a very cool jelly, and we were so happy to find it. We might come back to this guy later. Here's some other Tenophores I wanted to show you. Tenophores are a wide group of jellies in the ocean, and they have all different body forms. Ones that flap their lobes to move around, big lobes, some have big lobes. Others, like this Tenophore, have long tentacles that extend, and some even live on the bottom attached to sponges and rocks and have tentacles coming there. One thing about Tenophores, they don't have those stinging cells. They have sticky cells, which is a whole different way of feeding. But we'll talk about stinging cells later. Okay, before we jump on to the next animal in our ROV exploration, are there any questions about Tenophores?
There are some questions. So we have, Caroline is asking, what causes the comb structure to present similar to visible lights? I think she's at, I think, Caroline, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's asking what makes them look like they have lights and show those colors.
Yeah,
and do
sure.
they light, and Duncan, sorry, just to add to that, Duncan asked, do they light up when there's no light?
Okay, a few jellies do actually make their own light, bioluminescence, and it's a great area of jellyfish oceanography to study how they make light and what that role is, especially in the deep ocean where it's dark. The reflection that you have is from the structure of the hair itself. That structure, the composition, the way that those hairs are made, when light hits it, they kind of reflect back. And because they're moving back and forth, they have this shimmering effect. And they kind of move in little waves going back and forth. So that's why you kind of see different shades of color, because the angles are changing and the nature of the material. It's not quite like a prism, but you can think of it like that.
Great. And you know, someone was asking, so Ellie was asking, how deep do you have to go to find a Atenophore? And I'm going to take this one because I can't remember if Ellie's in our area or not, but living on Cape Cod, I can see Atenophores right next to the beach. In fact, they're beautiful. And I look for those rainbow shimmers. And that's, I'll always tell my kids, that's a Atenophore, you can see it. So sorry to steal that question from you, Mike, but
no, that's absolutely right.
They can see them as shallow as wading in the water. Okay, so Bridget has asked this and Tess has asked this, how many different types of Atenophores and then how many different types of jellyfish are there, if you had to make a guess on the number?
Yeah, hundreds and maybe 1,000 or so overall. So there's hundreds of kinds of Tinofors, and you know, and there may be 1,000 or more types of jellies overall. Of course, a lot of the jellies that originally get described by scientists are ones that you can see pretty close to the shore. But now that we're taking our ROV everywhere, and we've been doing it for a little while in the deep ocean, we're seeing things we've never seen before. So when we're not going on dives or doing talks like this, we're describing all of these new types of jellyfish for science. We're writing papers about them, we're taking tons of pictures, and we're talking to all the other scientists that work on jellyfish to say that, wow, we keep finding new jellies. I would say every time we go out with the ship and ROV, we find something new.
Great. Excellent answer. And we have so many questions coming in. I think one of the ones that a lot of people seem to be asking, so Raven was asking, what's the deadliest jellyfish? So I just wanted to reiterate, you just talked about Tinofors, and we know that they don't have stinging cells. So I want to just let Raven know that I think you're going to get to that and tell us, maybe you can tell us when you get to the one that is the deadliest, or you can answer that right now.
Why don't we talk about that when we get to the other forms of jellies that we will talk about later, because we are specifically going to talk about the stinging cells. And that's a great time to pause and to dive into the idea of the toxins and stuff like that.
Great. And one last question. I think I told you this was going to come in from Christopher, because we're seeing the pictures, but how small and how big can they get?
Yeah, jellies can be lots of different sizes. And we'll see ones, I'll mention that some of them can get very, very, very long. Some of them can be the longest animals on Earth, but others might not be much bigger than a penny. They can be really small. The cameras on Deep Discover are very good, so we get a pretty good zoom on it. But some can be the size of a nickel, a penny. Some can be a little bit bigger, and some can be really, really small. In fact, some of the tiniest ones sometimes are really, really interesting. So that's a great question. I'll try to remember to tell you the rough size of some of these things as we continue to explore.
Great. Well, I will tell you we have a lot of questions. There is a lot of interest, and I love them all. But I'm going to let you go on because I know you have some really exciting things to show us. So I'll hold on to them. If your question wasn't asked, I've got it on my list.
Okay. Well, let's continue to do more dives with the ROV. We're looking through the cameras of Deep Discoverer, and we continue to explore the deep ocean of the Pacific. And we're looking around for interesting jellies. And I see a long animal here. Okay, this is great. It looks long. It's moving a little bit faster than that purple Atenophore. It's kind of moving back and forth. Okay, now I can see there are different parts of this animal. At the top, when it's moving, at the front of the animal, it seems like things are more transparent. Below, it's more bright white. As we zoom in a little bit closer, I can see there are many kind of little cups, and they seem to be compressing and squirting in a way. And then below, everything else kind of trails behind it, kind of like a big long tail. This is a really cool animal. You can see it move. Yeah, let's take a closer look at this one. Okay, this animal that we just saw is a Siphonophore. I know, some of these jellyfish have really big names. Let's break this one down. Siphonophore. So siphono comes from the Greek word siphon, which means a tube. They're largely talking about these tubes that squirt the water on the top. Phore, as we learned before, is bearing. So it's like a tube-bearing organism. Let's look at some of the parts on this, because this is a kind of a complex type of jelly. At the top, this type of Siphonophore has a float, which is really neat. It's actually a part of the Siphonophore that inflates with a gas that's kind of like air, and it helps them be buoyant, and it helps them swim really well. Swimming bells, oops, I didn't spell it. Swimming bells here at the top, these are specialized bells that their job is to compress and to squirt water out and help it swim. At the bottom, this looks pretty complicated. This white stuff here and the colored orange stuff, these are all called zooids. So the way Siphonophores work is they're all connected. They're all part of the same group. They're part of a colony. These zooids, or these parts, the swimming bells, the float, and all the parts down here are all connected on a stem. Some of them are just made for swimming. They're parts of the body that just work on swimming. They compress and they help it move forward. Other parts are for digestion. They're for reproducing. They're for defense. They have tentacles that come out of it. So the zooids are all specialized. One of the things to think is they're a colony of individual organisms that are all connected by a common stem, like on a rope. And they all have to work together. The swimming bells in charge of swimming, the other zooids that are in charge of capturing prey and eating them, they're kind of in charge of nutrition. So these are pretty cool animals. This scientific name for this particular Siphonophore is Bargamania. And here's another picture of a Siphonophore, fairly similar to Bargamania. But I wanted to pause here and ask a question of all of you. Can you think of a vehicle that we see, sometimes, lots of times, that's made up of different parts that are all connected? Some kind of vehicle that people use.
Ellie is on the ball, I have to say. She came in with it. Ellie, I'm going to hold off for a second and see if Texas has also got it, and Duncan. So we've got a couple of different answers that are coming in, but all of you that said trains, those of you that said trains, I think that's what Mike was looking for with all those different cars, different functions that travel together.
A train is a cool way of thinking about a Siphonophore. You know, parts of the train have certain functions. The locomotive is for pulling the train, but people don't sit in a locomotive. And the passenger cars, that's where everybody sits, but it's not really in charge of pushing the locomotive along, pushing the train along. The Siphonophores have to work together. And one of the great things about these jellies for Siphonophores is how they all have to work together. That all those different swimming bells, angled at different angles, all have to kind of make sense so they can go where they want to go. And then all the other parts have their jobs together. So I think Siphonophores are really neat. And another fun fact about Siphonophores, we see lots of them. So let's jump in and take a deeper look at some other Siphonophores. These are other kinds of Siphonophores. Their body forms can blow your mind. There are ones that have very colorful parts here. This is called a cyphosome, where all these zooids are, so colorful. Some are just spherical, kind of hanging out close to the bottom, you know, really crazy. It's like they took the parts of a Siphonophore and just made it into a ball. And then others are very delicate with very small swimming bells, but lots of tentacles in a big net. They're very good at capturing prey. So let's take a quick pause here and just answer any more questions about Siphonophores before we keep going on our dive.
Great. Well, I have some questions. I know Joseph has been asking how deep do they live? And then he also was wondering what the deepest living Tenophore was. So I think he's into who's the deepest, if you could tell us that.
Yeah, they all go very deep. So the deepest that we can go with Deep Discoverer is 6,000 meters, which is almost 4 miles. And we've seen Tinofors there, and we've seen Siphonophores there. Also, other remotely operated vehicles from other parts of the world can go a little bit deeper, and they can see Siphonophores and Tinofors. So the answer to your question is, I don't really know. So far, for as deep as we've gone, they've been there. And as far as we know, they can go wherever they want to go.
Great. And Sarah asks, do they sting? I'm not sure if you mentioned that, but maybe you could just tell us whether Siphonophores sting?
Yes, you bet. And thanks for asking that question. I think it's really great. So some of the parts that we saw are tentacles, and on those tentacles for Siphonophores are stinging cells. We'll dive into stinging cells in a little bit, but yes, they do sting, and that's how they capture prey. The picture that you can see right here on the bottom, all these tentacles are studded with stinging cells, and they kind of hang it out like a net. And things that swim into it, they can get caught by the tentacles. So you bet, they have stinging cells and they use them really well.
Great. And Sarah is wondering, since you're talking about their prey, what do they eat?
Yep, all sorts of things. They can eat very small plankton in the water. They can get tiny fish, and that's sort of their main kind of prey. Other jellies. So that's what we've seen them jump in there. Full studies of kind of the diet of some of these jellies, especially the deep ones, we're not 100% sure, but a lot of them we know from some pretty lucky observations with our ROV. We've seen some of that.
Great. And an interesting question from Duncan is, why do we use Greek and Latin? Because you've been doing a really nice job of explaining that. And I always say to my kids, if you want to go into biology, you might want to take Latin so you understand what all the words mean. Do you know why we have that tradition of using Greek and Latin?
Sure, you bet. Science is very scholarly and academic, and people have been studying things for a very long time. And for a very, very long time, the language of science was Latin and Greek. And so many of the original descriptions that happen are in those languages. And many of the names, of course, are rooted and are still expressed using the Latin. In fact, even a paper that we're just publishing now still uses a Latin name. So they're still being created. So scientists today, like me, we're still following in the same tradition. That's a great question.
Great. Now here's a fun question for you. This comes from Sarah. Do jellyfish go to the bathroom?
Do they excrete? Yeah, they all do. Animals like that do excrete things that they don't need. They get rid of waste products that they don't need when they eat. They might do it in a different way than certainly people do, or other animals that you may see on the land. Like lots of invertebrates, sometimes they get rid of parts of prey items and food using the same mouth that it came in.
So they're going to the bathroom through their mouth. I just want to be clear. All right. Ellie asked a question. We learned about buoyancy on Monday. We were talking to the NOAA dive folks. So she just was wondering how the ROV maintains its buoyancy when you're going down to these different levels to look for things.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So there's two quick answers for that. And it's a great and a much longer discussion about the wonderful technology of the instruments that scientists like me use. The ROV itself, parts of it are actually buoyant. They are a special kind of, I don't want to use the word, but foam. And it has sort of like air-filled parts of it in tiny little spheres sometimes. And the other parts is it has thrusters, so it can move around. But the thrusters don't have to be on all the time to maintain its position in the water. It kind of hangs at a level of buoyancy that makes it easy to go. Think about like a scuba diver. They try to make sure that they're kind of at the right buoyancy. And things like fish don't have to, struggle. So that's how the ROV works. A little bit of flotation and some thrusters to help it out. But an engineer could probably give you a much, much better response than I can.
Great. So I have two more questions, and I'm just going to tell folks we're getting a lot of questions about stinging, and I know that Mike is going to get there, so I'm holding on to those questions. I'm not going to ask them yet. But the two quick ones I was hoping you would answer before we move on is Connor and Daniel ask, do they lay eggs? And then Laura and Julian asked a really interesting question. They know that plastic negatively impacts turtles because turtles think that those plastic bags are jellies, and so they're wondering, does the plastic have a negative impact on the jellyfish itself? So I know those are two very different questions, but I thought I'd give them to you and then say, please go on when you're done answering those.
Yeah, sure. Well, the one about plastic, I would say, I'm not sure directly what the plastic particles in the ocean are not always good. Certainly, I can understand how they affect turtles. I know that. But in terms of directly affecting the jellyfish, that's less clear. I don't know of any particular studies that do it. One thing to think about, though, is a lot of jellyfish or gelatinous animals filter a lot of water as the way that they feed. And whenever something is in the business of filtering water to collect its food, it could entrain plastic particles. And I don't think that's very good. So that's one way they could be affected. If there are pollutants in the water and it gets sucked into a jellyfish that's filtering water, that might harm them and not do too well. I'm trying to remember the other question. I'm sorry, Grace.
Do jellyfish lay? I know I shouldn't have asked two at once.
They do
jellyfish lay eggs?
Yes. The jellyfish have some very interesting ways of reproducing. Some of them do like lay eggs, and others have very interesting reproduction. You'll see some of the a jellyfish forms that you might be more familiar with, the medusae coming up, those have some interesting ways that they reproduce, where the eggs actually form a structure that actually goes to the bottom and grows on the bottom for a while, and then jellyfish pop off. So jellyfish reproduction does use eggs, and sometimes they use them in a really interesting way.
Great. Well, we would love to see more. I know you've got some more things to share with us. Thanks.
All right, let's continue our exploration of the deep ocean. And we're going to take a look. So we're back in Deep Discoverer. We're moving through the water in the deep Pacific, and we're going to take a look at another gelatinous animal. Okay, this one looks very exciting. It seems pretty flat, and it's pulsing. There's sort of this skirt at the bottom that's pulsing back and forth. It goes all the way around the bottom of the animal. And one thing is all of these long strands coming off. These certainly look like tentacles to me. And you can see it's pulsing away. This is a cool shot. This isn't very big. This might be maximum the size of a nickel or maybe a quarter. It's a pretty small jelly. Yep, so rhythmically pulsing back and forth. And the tentacles are much bigger if you think about the circle that the tentacles make compared to the middle body. And it's coming really close to the camera, which is always awesome. You can get right close up to it. It's so great. All right. So let's take a closer look at this particular gelatinous animal. This is a medusa. Medusa is a character from Greek mythology or Greek stories. It's a character that had long snakes for hair. And I think originally when people saw animals like this with tentacles, like the ones that you see on this jelly, they thought of that. So they called it a medusa. So one question I wanted to ask you is, the thing that was remarkable about this jelly that we encountered were all these tentacles all the way around. There were a lot of them, and they were really long. And I was wondering what you thought when you saw it exploring. Why do you think they have these tentacles?
So this is a great question, Mike. So kids, why do you think they have those tentacles? And one of the really neat things when you're making observations as a scientist is sometimes you discover something that you're not quite sure what the function is, and you have to make some observations. So what's your guess? Why do you think? So Duncan says stinging. Ellie and Nolan think that it's to grab food. Isabella and Eliana think it's to swim. Texas, Duncan, and Rose and Allison all think that it's to catch prey. Kyle thinks maybe it's a larger area of protection, as does Sarah. And Maddie thinks that maybe they're feelers. Serena agrees that to catch prey, as well as Itya thinks it's to get food. So I think that runs the gamut. Oh, and Raven thinks maybe it's to scare predators. So those are, I think, all our guesses.
Yeah, I think that all of those responses are within the realm of being possible. Remember, there are tons of different kinds of jellyfish, all different body forms. So some of those things might be absolutely true for a particular kind of jelly. For what we know today, most of the time, when we see tentacles on a gelatinous animal, it's for capturing prey. And they certainly are studded all along the tentacles. If you look at a microscope, there's a lot of stinging cells. And we'll talk about that in one next slide. So tentacles they invest a lot of energy making these big tentacles. It makes their body bigger. They sort of like clear a lot more water. They can reach and grab more. So they have a chance to encounter prey in a larger area. And that's what they're mainly used for. That we understand. But there are other uses for tentacles, and like I said, we're always learning more about these incredible organisms. All right, so let's continue on. Oh, and I don't want to forget that the Latin name for this particular jelly is solmissus, and some people call it a dinner plate jelly because it's this big flat plate. Okay, stinging cells. We want to talk about stinging cells. The Siphonophores that we saw and these medusae all have stinging cells. The Tinofors have a different type of cell. It's a sticky cell, not like these. But Siphonophores and the jellies that we talked about have stinging cells. They're called nematocysts, another big word. But nemato, it comes from the Greek nemat, which means a thread. So that's nemato. Cyst is from the Latin cystus, which means sac. So it's like a thread sac. That's kind of a weird thing to think about. But if you look at this cartoon of a nematocyst, and these are two different nematocysts here with different views, you can see that inside this structure, coiled up in this structure called a capsule, are these hollow threads. And the thread, at the end of the threads, are these really serious looking barbs, like hooks, like a harpoon. And you can see in this very powerful microscope image, that's what they look like in real life when we zoom in on them a lot. There's the sac, and there's the barbs on the top. One cool thing is, this is how stinging cells work. A lot of them get triggered. Some of them get triggered by a physical trigger where something gets bumped and this little hair hanging out. So if on the tentacle some animal bumps it or your arm runs against it at a beach, that trigger will fire off the thread and the barb at the end, and the hollow thread can actually pump some toxins in its prey. So let's pause there and talk about stinging cells before we take a look at our last animal of the journey. So any questions on stinging cells?
I think you know that there are questions on stinging cells.
All right, great.
Lots of questions on stinging cells. So Serena asked an interesting question. Can jellyfish have stinging cells on parts of their body besides the tentacles? I heard, this is from Serena, I heard, and I'm not going to pronounce this right, but the Ervkangli have stinging cells on the bell. So I may have mispronounced that, but
Yeah. Yep, a lot of jellyfish do have stinging cells on a lot of parts of their body, certainly on the tops of their bell. A lot of times you'll see that. You can see them really clearly. Sometimes you can see them with the naked eye because they're clustered up. Other parts of their bodies too, where they have like their stomach structures and the outside of that underneath their bell, those lots of times are studded with stinging cells.
And Ellie asks, will the stinging cells still work when the jellyfish is dead?
Yes, you know that because if you get stung by a jellyfish and the tentacle's still there, they can still fire. So yes, when they're away, the cells will still work. Now, after a while, everything's going to stop working. But shortly after you're stung, sometimes they say don't rub it, because that'll make the cells fire off again. You want to kind of pick them off.
Great. And Christopher asks, are they deadly? And then Cindy asks, are there remedies for the stings?
Sure, the two. So some jellyfish actually have toxins that are harmful for people. Basically the way you can think about it, in some parts of the world, there are jellies that have toxins that get pumped in when they use their stinging cells that are harmful. A lot of those places have very important measures that they take to keep people safe. They may be barriers under the water to keep the jellyfish at sea and let the people swim at the beach. In terms of remedies for like a regular sting that you might get in the United States while you're out and swimming, I think remedies are kind of a little bit more of a medical question. You should always look to the lifeguards. Lots of lifeguards are trained in what to do with stinging cells. Some of the basic things that you know is if you rub the tentacles that are on your body, that'll make them fire more stinging cells into you, and that might hurt more. So a lot of people say you can try to pick them off. Others can say maybe warm water is better than cold water. But you should consult your lifeguard or your doctor on kind of what to do when you get stung by a jelly.
Great. Okay, so I just want to, Michelle was asking about Portuguese man of war, so I'm just going to say that I know that you're getting to that, Mike, so I just wanted to put that out there. And Sarah has heard that vinegar can help jellyfish stings hurt less. Is that true?
You bet. That is true. If you look at Johns Hopkins, their website does talk about using vinegar as one particular remedy to kind of help ease the pain of jellyfish stings that you might have in the beach. But there's a whole series of things you need to do when you get stung by a jelly. So like I said, work with your lifeguards and medical people on what to do to keep you safe.
Great, good advice. So Michelle and I think some others were asking this as well, is why do jellies come to shore at certain times of the year? Why do we tend to see them close to shore at certain times of the year?
Sure. A couple of things. Jellyfish have seasonal cycles. They may have certain phases of life that they go through. I mentioned that sometimes when jellyfish reproduce, they live on the bottom. And then a certain time of year, they may bloom. Certain things like temperature or how salty the water is may inspire them to grow, kind of like you see plants in the spring. And then, of course, ocean currents can help move them around. So what you probably are seeing is that the seasonal timing is right for there to be a bloom of a particular type of jellyfish, and then the ocean currents can bring them in. Of course, there are populations of jellies very close to the shore. A lot of different types of jellies love to live on the surfaces that we put in the water. Concrete walls, pilings for docks. They love to stick to that and live there, and that's where they kind of bloom from. So that might be another reason why you see them really close to the shore at different times of the year.
Great. I have some more questions that are that people are asking, but I want to let you continue on because I know you have some more to share with us, so I'll save them for the end.
You bet. We'll go through the next jelly. I think this is the last jelly of our day. We are, again, looking through the cameras of our ROV, and we're coming across this jelly. Looks pretty big, and these are some of the bigger ones. This might be more than a few inches across. It's orange, and it's not as transparent as some of the other ones. I remember the Siphonophore, we could see through parts of it, but this one, not so much. It's pretty much orange, and some parts under it are very bright orange. And I can see tentacles like I had in the Solmissus. This is cool, and it's coming right close to the camera inside the lights. So let's take a look at this particular jelly. But really quick, I wanted to ask, like, why is this jellyfish orange? It's a lot of color for something in the deep ocean. Any ideas of why this jellyfish might have chosen or made itself orange?
All right, great question. And we had a question earlier about colors, if jellies come in all different colors. So here you are. I said it was coming. So why do you think that jellyfish is orange? So Brody thinks that maybe it's camouflage. Ellie thinks maybe it's because it eats something that's that color. Isabella thinks maybe it's to attract mates. Yep, and Eliana says maybe it's that color to be brighter like a frog as like a warning. Connor and Daniel agree, maybe so the predators won't eat it. And let's see, Texas thinks maybe just because orange is a cool color. I have to say orange is my favorite color. Edia is maybe to attract food, and Jennifer says maybe as a warning sign. So we've got a lot of good guesses here, Mike.
These are great responses. The one that we know the most about when we think about the coloration in some of these jellies is about camouflage, about making that jellyfish disappear so it's safe from predators. One of the things you have to remember is that even though we can see these jellies really clearly, that's because we have 24 super powerful lights on the ROV. But if those lights were off, it would be very dark. And not all colors of light transmit in the ocean very well. So by making itself orange, it basically makes itself disappear to the other animals in the deep ocean. One more quick thing. The stomach part that you see in the middle, that darker orange color, sometimes jellyfish eat animals that glow. And you don't want to be found by a predator because your lunch is growing through your stomach. So they use pigments to kind of mask what's inside. But overall, they're mostly used for camouflage. And I wanted to jump really quick to this other one. Oh, by the way, this jellyfish is called Paralia. Remember this other jelly, the first one we saw in our exploration today? The deep purple, same idea. It's all meant to be camouflaged. This is probably, in reality, very dark red. But it's really hard to image because it's camouflaging itself with that color. Here are some other different types of medusae. There are many different forms. Some are very small, maybe smaller, like this Cyclocana on the top left. That might be smaller than the eraser on a pencil. And some of them look absolutely fake. In fact, lots of people in the press asked us, that jelly on the top right, was that made by a computer? Is that picture like computer generated? No, it was definitely real. I was watching that dive when we saw it. And then other types, all different shapes, crazy tentacles. So Medusa can be a really exciting group of gelatinous animals. Well, before we surface and say goodbye to the ROV and I get back to work, let's just see if there's a couple of quick questions, and then we'll surface and catch up with any other ones. Any questions?
Yeah, so we did have a question about the Portuguese man of war, and so let's see, there were just questions about which kind the Portuguese man of war is and how deadly it is, because Levi had heard that they're the deadliest in the world. So maybe you could just say a word or two about the Portuguese man of war.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the deadliest in the world. I haven't really heard that part. But if you think about those Portuguese man of war, they're a modified form of the Siphonophore, the middle group of organisms that we looked at today. The big long ones with the pumping swimming bells. That's essentially, the Portuguese man of war are in the same group. They have an air-filled bladder. They have lots of tentacles that go out. And certainly with all those tentacles and all those stinging cells, they can be pretty nasty. So that's what I know about Portuguese man of war.
Great, yeah. So they're a colony of organisms, like we heard with the Siphonophore. So let's see, Sarah. I don't know if you can say anything about this. Sarah has heard something about called an immortal jellyfish. Have you heard of an immortal jellyfish?
I've heard ideas about it on the reproduction of certain kinds of jellyfish that essentially, based on their life cycle, when they grow and then reproduce and make new jellies, that essentially the same organism can kind of regenerate itself. I'm not really an expert on that type of that part of jellyfish, so I can't really say if that's really an immortal jellyfish or not. What I can say is, though, that groupings of jellyfish that reproduce, they can last for a very, very, very long time. So even when I have grown animals in the laboratory, they were growing for many years. And as well, when we see groupings of the structures of jellies that grow on the bottom, they're there for a very long time. So it's possible they might live for a really long time.
Great, and I think that answers Texas's question, because Texas has been asking how long jellyfish live. So very long time. I love to ask this question. Let's see, it was Isabella's. What's the weirdest thing you've ever seen?
Yeah, strange stuff that we've seen. Animals, I think it's really cool when you see animals inside jellyfish, little plankton organisms that are kind of like hanging on for a ride. We saw a Medusa jellyfish, and hanging onto it is this little plankton called an amphipod. It looks like a little crustacean, and it's just like hanging out. It's just grabbing on the inside of the bell and going along for the ride. And you see that a lot in the deep ocean. There's not many surfaces, so when there's a surface like the body of a jellyfish, people jump on, things jump on, plankton jump on. So I think that sometimes is the weirdest thing that we see.
Great. I'm going to let you finish up, and then I have a few questions if we have a few extra minutes, but I'll let you finish up, Mike.
Cool. Okay, well, let's surface, and we're done with our dive in the deep ocean of the Pacific, and the ROV will get put back on to the ship. I wanted to take a second. Remember, the ROV is always attached to the ship, and people on the ship are controlling it. This is a picture of the control room inside the ship, and the guys in the front row are the ROV pilots. Sorry, I'll back that up. And the people in the back are some of the science team. But it takes a few people to kind of run the ROV, just to fly it around. And there's many more people that help keep it working properly and take care of it at night. And so the ROV comes back onto the ship with a big crane. And for jellyfish scientists like myself, the most important cargo are in those little containers that we saw in the beginning. So the crew will bring the Deep Discoverer here and swing it back onto its little cradle. everything will get turned off. They'll carefully take those samples out, bring them into the lab. They'll take pictures of those samples of the jellyfish that we collect into the evening, and they'll even be able to show us those pictures immediately, and we can talk to them. And then those samples eventually, like I showed you in the sample jar, will come back to the laboratory for us to see. So that's the end of our exciting journey of looking at jellyfish. So I want to take a pause and see if there's any more questions. So anything at the end, it was really great talking to you, but I want to give you a chance to shout out any more questions you might have about what we talked about today.
Yeah, we had an interesting question, and unfortunately, I'm sorry, I can't find who asked it, but since you were just talking about taking samples back to the lab, there was a question, do you feed the jellies? I think the idea is, do you keep them alive when you're studying them?
Yep. In some studies, what we do on jellyfish, we do keep them alive in the laboratory and study them. In the early part of my career, I studied how jellyfish swim. And all of those animals were alive, and they were swimming inside tanks with special video cameras. A lot of the samples that we take from the deep ocean, we don't keep the jellyfish alive. They are taken into the sample jars, and we use a preservative, and we keep the jellyfish. Sometimes it's hard to think about, but remember this. When we preserve those jellyfish in collections, dozens and dozens of scientists around the world can now study them. Samples move around the world, from museum to museum, from lab to lab. So even though we take an animal and we preserve it and it stays inside a container on the shelf forever, we study it like crazy. We take tons of pictures, we do a lot of analysis, and we share what we learn and what we write about. So it's all part about how we learn about organisms in the ocean.
Great, and thank you. Tess was the one that asked that question. So thank you, Tess, for reminding me. I was looking to see if I could figure out. And I think Sarah asked this. You know, she was wondering, we asked you what's the weirdest thing, but she was saying, what's the prettiest thing? And I'm also going to add to that. So what's the prettiest and your favorite?
Yeah, so that first jelly that we saw, and I can back up to it really quick. For me, it's this one. I think you can all see that. This jellyfish is certainly mine. I'll leave it on the screen for a little bit longer.
Yeah, so if you could put the screen back up, you had it up and then it went, there it is. It is beautiful.
This I consider to be the most beautiful. There's a couple of reasons. The way the tentacles move when it swims are fantastic. The colors, the transparency, I just think it's wonderful. I've seen a lot of really great jellyfish, and one of the things that a lot of times brings scientists to study things is that they're beautiful. And that certainly is true for many of the jellyfish that we see.
Great, and I might ask you a few more questions. This is sort of our last one before our all-star show. So people are still asking questions. I'd love to ask you a few more. Yeah, so let's see. So Allison is asking if they are neon. So you've showed us different colors. So there have been a couple questions about the different colors that they come in. So if you could just speak to maybe the different colors that you tend to see.
Yep. We see tons of colors in jellyfish. I am trying to think of a color that I haven't seen in a jellyfish, and that's taking me a few moments. So I would say that they come in many of the colors of the rainbow for certain. Yes, about neon and glowing. There are some jellyfish and many animals in the deep ocean that create their own light, that light up. And this particular type of lighting up like this bioluminescence, is an important part for lots of different functions, for attracting mates, but certainly for defense. Making itself seem bigger. Some jellyfish have light patterns that look like the eye of a very big fish, which would scare away some of its predators. And like we mentioned before, sometimes color is used as a camouflage. But we've seen them all, you know, dark, jet black, gelatinous animals, like we had a Atenophore like that. But yeah, there's some beautiful colors.
Great. I have just one last question and then we will have to wrap up. And this comes from Raven, and it's, what's the most common jellyfish you see? Is there one that is sort of more prevalent than others?
That's a really great question. And I think it's what a lot of us do, or a lot of NOAA oceanographers think about is what role do jellyfish have in certain places, and which jellyfish do we find in certain places that are dominant? So one way to answer the question, it depends on where you are for what the common jellyfish will be. If you think about the east coast of the US and some of those jellies, there's a lot of different types of Tinofors. You see many Tinofors in the water, almost everywhere. It's hard to answer in a survey across the global ocean because we just don't know. That small exploration that we did is a very tiny patch of the ocean. So we don't really know the full balance of the abundance of certain types of animals that we see. On the coast, where we studied a lot more, we can have a sense of it. For example, I know in lots of places, there are tons of Siphonophores. We see them all the time when we tow nets on the ship, when we use other vehicles. We can see salps, other kinds of gelatinous animals. But, it's tough to answer. Locally, yeah, there's some common ones. Tinofors are always common. There's some Medusa jellyfish that we always see near our shores, and those are happening close to shore, even 100 miles from shore. But in the deep ocean, it's a great question. I don't know what the most common type of jellyfish was. We aren't really done exploring the ocean, and we have a lot of work to do.
Great. Well, I think that is a great note to end on, because all of our young scientists, Mike just told you, there is a lot still to explore, a lot to learn, a lot for you all to do, right? I always feel like it's important for our kids to know that we don't know everything. Sometimes we know a lot, but we don't know everything. So thank you so much, Mike. It was wonderful to learn about jellyfish. You were just such a nice imagery that you showed with us, and your expertise and answering all the questions. I know I speak for the students. We really appreciate the time that you spent with us. I will tell you that Mike is also affiliated with the Smithsonian. So I know that the samples he was talking about taking back to the lab, and maybe some of them being stored in the Smithsonian. So that's another great place to go and explore. So thank you so much for today. I want to share too with everyone that we always like to share with you our next webinar that's coming up. So this was our last single topic webinar, but our webinar on Friday is our All Stars show. So we brought 8 folks back that everyone voted for and said, we want to hear them and ask them a few more questions. Each of those 8 is going to give a really quick speed talk to remind you of their area of expertise, and then we're going to ask them questions that you give us. So you can jump on and write us questions, especially look at the list on our website to see. We're going to have Commander Jason Mansour, who's going to talk about hunting hurricanes. Allison Henry did our how she surveys whales from the sky. We had Malia, who talked about archaeology in Hawaii. We had Genevieve Davis, who talked about marine mammals and sound. Heather Tabasola is going to talk about sail drones. Dana, and I'm sorry, Dana, to do this. Wisinich Mendez, I hope I didn't mispronounce that, is going to talk to us about coral reefs. Sean is going to talk to us about tornadoes, and Chris is going to talk to us about sharks. So I encourage you to come on Friday to our webinar with questions ready to ask of all of our experts. Nicole and I will be tag teaming and moderating together. She and I have been doing each our own webinars, but so glad that you were the last in the series, Mike. And so join us for the All-Star Show on Friday. We look forward to seeing all of you. There is a surprise. Look in your email. We are going to be sending something out after the last webinar on Friday that you can get for completing the webinar series. So look for that email as well. All right. Thanks so much, Mike. And everybody have a great day. Friday.
Thank you very much.